Chapter 6 of Gold by Stewart Edward White. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Village in the Jungle. At first there seemed slight chance of getting either. The place was crowded beyond its capacity. The Hotel Français, a shed and tent sort of combination with a muddy natural floor, was jammed. The few native huts were crowded. Many we saw making themselves as comfortable as possible amid their effects out in the open. Some we talked with said they had been there for over a week, unable to move because of lack of transportation. They reported much fever, and in fact we saw one poor shaking wretch, wistful-eyed as a sick dog, braced against a tree all alone. The spirit was drained out of him, and all he wanted was to get back. While we were discussing what to do next, our muslin-clad ex-padrone, who had been paid and shaken by the hand some time since, approached, smoking a longer cigar than ever. This he waved at us in a most debonair and friendly manner. "Bread on the water," commented Talbot after a short conversation. "He says we have treated him like a brother and a true comrade in arms, which means that I did. You fellas, confound your spiteful souls, wanted to throw him overboard a dozen times, and now he says to follow him and he'll get us a place to stay." "Some native pigsty with fleas," I remarked skeptically, aside to Johnny. "You come," begged the padrone with a flash of teeth. "We came bearing our household goods, because we could nowhere see anyone to bear them for us. At that we had to leave the heaviest pieces on the beach." Talbot insisted on lugging his huge bundle of newspapers. "They may come in handy," he answered us vaguely. "Well, they're mine, and this is my back," he countered to Johnny's and my impatience with such foolishness. The padrone led us through town to the outskirts. There we came to a substantial low house of several rooms, with a veranda and veritable chimneys. The earth in front had been beaten so hard that even the downpour of yesterday had not appreciably softened it. To our summons appeared a very suave and courteous figure, that it appeared of the alcalde of the place. "My friend," explained the padrone in English for our benefit. "They good people. They want us stay. Got no place to stay." The alcalde, a portly gentleman with side whiskers and a great deal of dignity, bowed. "My house is all yours," said he. Thus, although arriving late, we stopped at the best quarters in the town. The sense of obligation to anyone but our boatman was considerably relieved when next day we paid what we owed for our lodging. Also, had it not been for Talbot and Johnny, I am sure Yank and I would have taken to the jungle. There seemed to be required so much bowing, smiling, punctiliousness, and elaborate complimenting that in a short time I felt myself in the precise mental attitude of a very small monkey shaking the bars of his cage with all four hands, and gibbering in the face of some benign and infinitely superior professor. I fairly ached behind the ears, trying to look sufficiently alert and bland and intelligent. Yank sat stolid, chewed tobacco, and spat out of the window, which also went far toward stampeding me. Talbot and Johnny, however, seemed right at home. They capped the old gentleman's most elaborate and involved speeches. They talked at length and pompously about nothing at all. Their smiles were rare and sad and lingering, not a bit like my imbecile, though well-meant, grinning. And they seemed to be able to stick it out until Judgment Day. Not until I heard their private language after it was all over did I realize they were not enjoying the occasion thoroughly. Toward sunset occurred a welcome break. A mob of natives suddenly burst into view from the direction of the town. They were running madly, led by a very little man and a very big man. The two latter rushed up to the edge of the veranda on which we were all sitting, and began to talk excitedly both at once. "What's the row?" we asked Talbot in a breath. "Can't make out yet. Something about a fight." The alcalde commanded order. Then the matter became clear. The very large man and the very little man had had a fight, and they had come for justice. This much Talbot made plain. Then he chuckled explosively. "The little man is making his accusation against himself," he told us. "He is charging himself with having assaulted and beaten the other fellow. And the big one is charging himself with having licked the little one. Neither wants to acknowledge that he got licked, and each would rather pay a fine and have it entered on the records that he won the fight. So much for sheer vanity." Each had his desire. The alcalde, with beautiful impartiality, fined them both and nonchalantly pocketed the proceeds. At dusk millions of fireflies came out. The earth grew velvet black, and the soft, tepid air breathed up from the river. Lights of the town flickered like larger, yellower fireflies through the thin screen of palms and jungle. And the various noises, subdued by distance, mingled with the voices of thousands of insects and a strange booming from the river. I thought it very pleasant and wanted to stay out, but for some reason we were hailed within. There the lamps made the low, broad room very hot. We sat on real chairs, and the stilted exchange resumed. I have often wondered whether our host enjoyed it, or whether he did it merely from duty and was as heartily bored as the rest of us. A half-naked servant glided in to tell us that we were wanted in the next room. We found there our good padrone and another, a fine tall man dressed very elaborately, in short jacket and slit loose trousers, all sewn with many silver buttons and ornaments. "He my friend," explained the padrone. "He have dos mules." With the gorgeous individual, Talbot concluded a bargain. He was to furnish us riding animals at $10 each per day, and agreed to transport our baggage at $6 a hundredweight. The padrone stood aside, smiling cheerfully. "I very good friend, eh?" he demanded. "My son," said Talbot with feeling, "you're a gentleman and a scholar. Indeed, I would go farther and designate you as a genuine Lollapaloozer." The padrone seemed much gratified, but immediately demanded $5. This Talbot gave him. Johnny thought the demand went far toward destroying the value of the padrone's kindness, but the rest of us differed. I believe this people, lazy and dishonest as they are nevertheless peculiarly susceptible to kindness. The man had started by trying to cheat us of our bargain. He ended by going out of his way to help us along. At supper, which was served very shortly, we had our first glimpse of the ladies of the establishment. The older was a very dignified, placid, rather fat individual, whose chief feature was her shining dark hair. She bowed to us gravely, said a few words in Spanish, and thereafter applied herself with childlike and unfeigned zest to the edibles. The younger, Mercedes by name, was a very sprightly damsel indeed. She too had shining black hair, over which she had flung the most coquettish sort of lace shawl they called a rebosa. Her eyes were large, dark, and expressive, and she constantly used them most provocatively, though with every appearance of shyness and modesty. Her figure, too, was lithe and rounded, and so swathed rather than clothed that every curve was emphasized. I suppose this effect was the result of the Spanish mode rather than of individual sophistication, just as the succession of lazy poses and bendings were the result of a racial feminine instinct rather than of conscious personal coquetry. Certainly, we four red-shirted tramps were poor enough game. Nevertheless, whatever the motive, the effect was certainly real enough. She was alluring rather than charming, with her fan and her rebosa, her veiled glances, her languorous, bold poses, and the single red flower in her hair. A great deal of this allurement resided in the very fact that no one could tell how much was simple, innocent, and unconscious instinct, and how much was intended. An unpleasing note in both women was furnished by the powder. This so liberally covered their faces as to conceal the